Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the SIIA Webcast on the EdTech Industry Market Watch Report Pre-K to 12 webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Wednesday, November 16th, 2011. I would now like to turn the conference over to Karen Billings, Vice President, Education Division. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome to today's webcast on the market report. I've got just a couple of announcements before we turn it over to our guests who will talk about the market. One is that, as she said, it's being recorded so that we can put it for reference on our website later. Please, as she asked, submit your questions in the chat feature. And a couple of things. We've got 4 webcasts coming up in the next 2 weeks. So if you are a member and would like to join any of these webcasts for free, please go to SIIA's website and check out the events calendar, and then you can register. There's links for each one right there. The EdTech Business Forum, while it's sold out for the in-person sessions in New York on December 28th and 29th, there's still lots of opportunities to register virtually and to participate that way. We are planning to host an EdTech Pavilion at BET London in early January. If you're interested in sort of participating with us in that EdTech Pavilion, please email me at kbillings@siia.net, and I'll get you information about how you can do that. And finally, we are planning our EdTech Industry Summit in May, San Francisco. It has a theme of bridging K-12 and post-secondary. So if you're interested in either speaking or sponsoring or being on the steering committee to help plan it, again, you can email me. And you've been getting all my emails the last few hours, so I'm sure you know how to do that. And then, of course, if you've got some thoughts about working groups and committees that you would like to be active in, whether it's innovation or personalized learning or open education resources or voice of the educator or just any number of them that we have, just simply let me know. So today we've got the key panelist is John Richards, who's President of Consulting Services for Education, and Wujcik, who is, as it shows, editor of the EdNET News Alert, as well as an education research analyst for MDR, Market Data Retrieval. So I'm going to turn it over to John now, who's going to talk a little bit about our newest report. He helped analyze the data for this report and has written, I think, a very useful report. And John, if you're ready, it's all yours.
Yes. Hi, everyone. This is the 2010 U.S. education technology industry market, looking at the 2009-2010 school year. And this is the first of what will be annual reports, and there will be actually 2 each year, one pre-K-12 and one for higher ed. This is part of the SIIA Market Data and Analysis Committee, and the people that have been on the committee for the last 2 years are listed on this page, and they have contributed both to the creation of the survey that we're going to discuss and the design of what we were doing. Let's see. Sorry. This is an annual vendor study. We are trying to get data from vendors on their market segment sales. So it differs from other reports that tend to focus on the school side, the demand side, and we're looking at the supply side. And there are several reasons that we chose to do this. The first is there's both the vagaries of the school world, where if you talk to 5 different people at a district, you're going to get 5 different numbers on how much money was spent on education technology products. Second, there's the notion that free with purchase, where if a school purchases something and software comes with it free, they feel they've spent nothing on software. We are relying on the publisher's accounting, so if they have allocated a certain percentage of that sale for software or digital resources, then we are counting that as a sale. And finally, we believe that the accuracy coming from the vendor side will really allow us to get a much better view of the overall market. And the goals are to measure the size and scale and trends. Obviously, we can't do trends this first year, and there are certain findings that I'm going to talk about, and I think it's important to stress their tentative nature. We are specifically looking at education software, digital content, and resources, and not hardware. We divided the market into 3 basic market segments: content, instructional support, and that includes assessment and PD, and platforms and administrative tools. We inquired about special markets that people were interested in: AP, special ed, and English language learners. Those overlapped in many cases the content, and we used that. We asked people to identify when it did overlap. The top, keep hitting the wrong thing here. Sorry. There we go. So our key findings in 2009 and 10 is we believe this is a $7.5 billion market. And as you look at the pie chart, there are 3 areas. The largest is content, and that includes the special categories of AP, ELL, and special ed. And that, we believe, is around 42%. The instructional support, which we'll explain, is about 35%, and the platforms, administrative tools, the underlying IT kinds of things, is about 23%. So I should talk a little bit about our methodology and how we came to these numbers. To begin with, we identified 357 companies as our vendor universe. And we found these companies by looking at the vendor lists at many of the main conferences, ranging from ISTE to NCTM, and also looked at SIIA membership, trying to get a sense of people who were selling into the institutional pre-K-12 market. We then created a survey using SurveyMonkey, and 81 of the 357 companies participated, reporting $1.37 billion in revenue. We then assumed, given the first year, that our 357 was shy of the size of the universe, so we said that we were working in a 400-company market and created what I'll discuss as a revenue tier extrapolation, and that is we divided the companies up by their total revenue, and that and in order to segment the data we had and use that to extrapolate. And then finally, as a part of the methodology, we made adjustments for who participated and who did not. So, for example, we amongst the participants were the larger content companies, but some of the infrastructure and tools, larger tool companies like Microsoft or Adobe, did not participate at this point. So we had to make some adjustments based on other research that we did to try to get a feel for the size of the whole market. So we divided the world into 4 revenue tiers, and again, this is not just digital. This is both digital and print sales into the pre-K-12 U.S. market. So these were the 4 tiers that we created. The lower one under 5 million, then from 5 to 25, from 25 to 100, and above 100 million. And we did research both on our own and also using things like tools like Orbis. Our survey sample on the right here, the darkest is Tier 4 on the bottom, going up Tier 3, 2, and 1. And as you can see, it was interesting, our Tier 1 and Tier 2 companies were about 22% of our survey sample, and we're also about 22% in the universe. So we were pleased that our distribution was relatively similar to the universe. And the report of the 1.37 billion ended up with content being 56%, and that does include the special categories, instructional support 31 and the administrative tools 13. And we frankly believe that the administrative tools and instructional support were underreported, and we adjusted for that later on. This is a little bit maybe difficult to read, and I'm not trying to get people to actually look at the data per se, and we'll look at it more carefully individually. But what we did here, each of the parts of the survey are reflected here. So for example, under content, we asked people to report reading, mathematics, science, social studies, and then other content. For instructional support, that was defined as testing and assessment, professional development, learning management systems, and productivity tools. And for the administrative tools, we looked at central office, data, IT management, student information services and scheduling, and course management, content management systems. And finally, we took a look at ELL and SPED. We were also looking for AP, but did not get enough data to bring that into account. And one of the things I should say, which was a guiding paradigm for everything we did, was to maintain the strict confidentiality of everyone's reporting. And if a particular area, in this case AP, did not have enough people reporting, we did not include that in the data in order to protect whoever had reported. And we did not specifically identify companies by which areas they reported. Any questions? Okay. So if we look in particular at the content market segment, we have data on reading, English language arts, arithmetic, mathematics, science, social studies, history, and other. And frankly, from my perspective, and we'll look at this a little bit more carefully, the most interesting piece of this reporting is where science stands as opposed to social study and history. And the next piece takes a look at our survey, which is the second column. And do people see my green arrow? And we compared this to data that Resnick's collected and that AAP collects. And what I thought was very interesting was if you look at reading ELA, our survey reported 47%, Resnick and AAP were around 38%. Our Arithmetic, mathematics was pretty commensurate with theirs, but science at 19% was really out of whack, as was social studies history at 5%. And that, to me, was really surprising, because these numbers that everyone's finding 10 to 12% for both science and social studies and history have been pretty consistent across a lot of other surveys. Now, one interpretation is we're looking at technology only, and that science has been more amenable to technology resources. And another is that this is an aberration, and next year we'll find that it smooths out. So I want to be a little cautious in what I'm saying about this, but it was frankly quite surprising that we got that big a difference from what other people are finding. Under instructional support, we found testing and assessment and PD about the same, and the instructional management LMS systems were a bit higher, and I think that's interesting. As people are saying now, the LMS systems are becoming, and instructional management systems are really becoming pretty standard across the industry. And then when we look at the platforms and administrative tools, these are relatively flat. The data IT management is the largest segment at 36%. The student information systems and class scheduling at 30%. Content management and digital repositories 22%, and the central office administrative tools 12%. And again, my guess is that the central office administrative tools is a larger category, and we did not get reporting there. Any questions on this so far? Frank, you have a question. Wow.
Believe it or not, Frank has the first question.
I'm shocked. Okay, so I did answer it. Oh, okay.
Right.
So let me then take a look at some of what we've learned out of this. Whoops. And some points to make. Number one, this is 2009-2010 data. And the data, I think, was particularly affected by ARRA during that period. And while not every penny of that has been distributed, it's at this point been allocated and is not going to be there this year. E2T2, Title 2D is gone, and that was also a real source of funding during this period. And the budget crises are sort of settling in, particularly at the state level. So on the negative side, as we're moving ahead, there's a real sense that the 10-11 data we're going to find is probably not going to be as high as what we found in 9-10. And that is a guess from looking at some of the analyst reports that have been going on. But we are starting collecting data for the 10-11 survey this week, and you'll see some of that at the end of this. In terms of the positive side of things, to me, the most interesting piece are the state laws right now that are looking for adoption of digital content in Texas, in Florida, in California. Those are really underlying an important trend and something that I think we're not really seeing the effect of yet. and that may still be, that may not be until the 11-12 school year, but there's a really important piece here that we have to start looking at. The OER push, everyone is interested in that because it has the promise of less expensive or free materials for schools. Frankly, I'm a little pessimistic about that because at the same time they want that, they're asking for correlations and embedded assessment and other kinds of requirements that are difficult in the OER world. And Anne is going to talk a little bit about that after this. The notion of disaggregated content, I think, is a very important idea that instead of buying all 20 chapters of a textbook, the notion that people can select a smaller group of chapters or parts or media is a really important new possibility with digital. And part of the issue is how does that get paid for? And what are sort of the operational underpinnings of all of that? Some of that's been going on at the post-secondary higher ed level, and it'll be interesting to see how that might get implemented pre-K-12. And the notion of disaggregation and the notion of having a technology base that people can bring multiple sources in, I think, is becoming a lot more important. And part of that is made possible because of fairly large investment in infrastructure and adoption of cloud computing. One of the things that's critical across the country is you look at nearly 14,000 school districts and probably 10,000 of those that are small enough that they really don't have their own IT infrastructure. So the notion of a cloud base for a lot of the smaller districts is really important. And finally, something I want to spend a little bit of time on in terms of upcoming digital sales is the movement for bring your own device, BYOD. I think this is absolutely happening. It's whether we think of it as a way to tax people for attending school or whatever it is. Notice no one's talked about this at all at the college higher ed level, and yet that's become an absolute accepted part of higher education. Students bring their own computers in and log into the infrastructure. And this, one-to-one, if you look at it without BYOD, it's gone over the years from 7 students per computer to just under, right now, around 3 or a little under, and keeps sort of meandering down. But from my perspective, how it comes down to one-to-one is pretty straightforward, and that is with the lower cost tablets and other mobile devices, but about the notion of student-owned devices being allowed into the system. If we thought there was a digital divide before, it's going to become huge. But as a publisher vendor, what it means is people are going to start developing materials with the assumption of ubiquitous technology. And that, I think, can have a very large impact on the kinds of software and developments that are in process.
John, Karen, I was just going to interrupt, I guess. I just read a report, and I need to get the actual name of it, but they're talking about the amount of applications, the amount of software being written for digital devices, and they're now changing the term digital divide to app divide because there's so many kids that have access to a lot of apps. based on what their parents will help them buy. And then, of course, other kids are not. And that divide is happening so quickly.
And I think to me, this will happen. I think we're going to see it in the next year or two, and what it requires from a vendor perspective is the issues around security and moving into an infrastructure and having the infrastructure stable for multiple devices, being able to run on multiple devices is going to be an absolute requirement as we go there. So that's my report here. Are there any questions? We're planning a Q&A at the end after Ann's piece. But are there any questions now? It looks like the chat's pretty quiet. Great. In that case, I will turn it over to Ann.
Thank you, John. I'm honored to be here today. Karen and John were kind enough to invite me to sort of play the role of responder, largely because in EdNET Insight, which is a subscription service, kind of a high-level decision support service that MDR offers to clients, we have a parallel is too strong, but we have done a large survey that looks at the demand side of the market. And I'm talking about the 2010 edition, which is we're releasing the 2011 shortly. So, you know, as I thought about this, I sort of thought, well, how am I going to pull this? You know, it's very different. So I tried to pull points that paralleled some of what John had written about, some of what he's talked about today, and some of what I know he struggled with. And I have to laugh because on the demand side, our sampling was very simple compared to John having to look at registration lists and go through conference lists and build a universe. We were going to district-level decision makers, and that's a sample, a universe that we know a lot about. I know a lot about it, and so do you. We know how many of them, how many districts there are. We know what size they are. We know where they are. We know a whole bunch of stuff about them. So that for us was the easy part. And we built our sample plan on using small, medium, and large, defined as between 1,000 and 5,000 kids enrolled, medium 5,000 to 15,000, 14,999, and the large being 15,000 and up. But as we worked at this, we looked at, and that was the simple part. After that, it gets harder. Because as we looked at this, we realized that only 4% of schools, of all school districts in the U.S., are large. I mean, large districts, if you look at the 13,000, however many there are, 4% of those are defined as large districts. But they enroll 45% of all K-12 students. So you have this, and when I work for you guys, when you guys call me, when you call John, when you call Karen, I mean, you tend to want to look at the big districts. If John or I could do a report that gave you the details on the 15 largest districts in the country down to the penny, we would be very popular people. But John makes a good point in the report, which he didn't emphasize that much in his speech, which is that, there are a lot of other districts out there. So I think that, going at it from the supply side really gets you a much better look at what's going on. You can't only sell to large districts. Nevertheless, we opted to look at our sample by district size on the basis of the number of students they enrolled. So large school districts enrolled 45% of kids. Our hope was that the large school districts in our sample would enroll 45% of the kids represented in our sample. And obviously we missed it because that is one of the challenges. Large school districts were underrepresented because it's hard to get to large school districts. But on one side, we really did have a much easier sampling problem than John did. In the end, we surveyed in late spring, I think it was April of 2010, 246 curriculum directors and 272 technology directors. This is a solid, good sample. It's just not quite as representative as we might have liked it to be. The next slide, Karen. So I'm trying to think about what ideas might match. And it struck me that one of the things we asked our guys to do was to tell us about the priority they were attaching to a number of different technology initiatives. So these are the top initiatives that they rated for us. And they rated these as either a high priority for the district or a medium priority. So 78% of districts told us that they were building out high priority, medium priority, building out wireless networks. So you think about what John was saying about bring your own device and mobility, and that the world in which desktop computing, the one-to-one, or even laptop computing, which was the model for one-to-one, is rapidly changing to a world in which we're building out the wireless network to enable mobility. So kids are going to have a lot of different devices in hand. I think John's right on that. Another top priority for them was acquiring interactive whiteboards. You know how popular these have been in schools. And so the concomitant piece of that is when you're looking at the software or the digital content that you supply, they are asking you to have digital whiteboard ready content. How that plays out as we move into the more mobile environment remains to be seen. Another high priority for all of our districts, 66%, 2 out of 3, told us that they were going to be acquiring netbooks. This is a combination of netbooks being more mobile than laptops and netbooks being cheaper than laptops. I mean, remember we were doing this in 2010 when the schools were still and continue to suffer under their budget problems. But at that point in time, 35% also said that they were planning to acquire slates and tablets. The only functional slate on the market right then was the Apple iPad at, I don't know, let's say $600 average. So this wasn't economy. This was something about the form factor. So this all sort of reinforces a lot of what John just spoke to you about in the area of wireless mobility, multiple form factors existing in the school, and increasingly in the classroom, all of those factors part of that, which is why I chose to focus on these as our demand side supporting what John was saying on the supply side. The next slide, Karen. We asked about digital content, obviously, and roughly 30% of the districts at that point in time expected to see extensive replacement of print by digital formats over the next 3 years. So they were planning already, and not just already, they were planning and implementing in April 2010 to slowly but steadily move towards more extensive use of digital formats as a replacement for print. Though we see that particular drive persisting in the work that we did this year. We asked them also about the things that they took into consideration when they made a decision about what digital content or what instructional materials they were going to purchase. We didn't place it digitally. So what do they consider and think as being important when they're looking to make a decision about buying something to use with their kids? And the highest 3 in their mind was that they looked to see, was that instructional material available in a digital format? They may not have bought all digital. This is my interpretation. They didn't say that. But they wanted to be sure that they could get digital format for what they were looking at. They wanted, as I said earlier, the inclusion of content that was interactive, whiteboard ready. And then looking at those 3 special areas that John chose to pull out, AP, Special Ed, and ELL, it was also very important to many of them, especially urban and large districts, that the content they were evaluating was available for use with ELL students, that somehow it accommodated the needs of their ELL population. And I think that will continue to be important moving forward. I think that's one of the reasons John pulled it out to look at, even though it then got folded back into the overall data. The next slide, Karen. Wrong way. That's why I'm not doing it. We also asked about open educational resources, and you know, this is a very tricky area. This was April 2010. More than 70% of the curriculum directors, now these are not tech people, these are curriculum directors, were familiar with OER. And we used the more formal definition of OER. We didn't just ask about free resources. We asked about resources that were freely available and which they could modify, remix, and republish under the appropriate licenses. So, you know, 70% of the curriculum people were familiar with OER. So, and 1 in 3 told us that they were willing to consider the use of an OER textbook within the next 3 years. This is roughly the time frame, about a year, I think, John, after the big California brouhaha about, you know, moving their textbooks to OER or going, you know, whatever it was. California ended up with a bunch of PDFs. But nevertheless, that had focused a lot of attention, and there's an openness here. But I think John's right. They do want their resources to work in a variety of ways. This year we got some open-ended comments from people talking about digital resources that say, you know, a flat PDF is not an appropriate conversion from print to digital. So when OER people do that, you would think it wouldn't be an appropriate model for them either. There are a few things on the scene that are attempting to make it easier to take OER resources and move them into a more standards-aligned resource. You know, John was talking about a disaggregated content. And I think the Learning Registry from the Department of Education and some other things coming down the road may be an attempt to make it easier for teachers to not just find free resources, discover them, but also to be able to correlate them more to their curriculum. That said, those same processes will be available to those of you in the commercial world. So I don't see OER as, you know, the threat that's going to eat Cincinnati. I just think it's always going to be there. In the way that, you know, guys, have we ever not had free resources in this marketplace? So, but, you know, they're highly aware of them, and they're thinking about how they might use them in their curriculum. And as budget pressures continue, they will continue to think that way. The next slide, Karen. So, oh, all right. Did I end there? I didn't realize that. Let me make a few other comments about that.
There's one other slide.
Thank you. This is the one I want to look at. Some of the other things John talked about. We asked about SIIA. These are in the categories other than content. We asked them about SIS. You know, student information systems are almost universally implemented in the schools at this point in time. There are a few districts that report that they're not using SIS. I can't imagine what they're doing given the world we live in. So, you know, that one is there, and since it's so universally implemented, John's going to have to continue to work to be sure that that's accounted for. The learning management system we're seeing much lower usage levels. If SIS is at 98%, the learning management systems and data warehouses are below 50% in terms of wide implementation. With the LMS on the school side, which is one of the reasons that it helps to also have supplier information, they're very confused about what an LMS is. I mean, we got answers and open-ended comments that told us about everything from the classic LMS, you know, the Blackboard-like push-out content and courses, to comments like Excel and Rosetta Stone, both of which are excellent products, but you know, why would somebody think this was an LMS? So John is correct in the need to counterbalance school data, which is sometimes, you know, they're doing the best they can, but this is not their lifeblood. So the balancing, I think, is a really terrific benefit that this report brings to the market. Software as a service, or actually this year we talked more with them about cloud applications. at that point in time, 2 out of 3 districts were using at least one software as a service application. And it was pretty clear to me that that was going to move forward as well, which changes the infrastructure that John was talking about. Online learning was certainly on its way to being mainstream. Many districts were already offering at least one online course. That growth has continued through this year. In terms of professional development, we found I don't know if it's an odd thing, but it struck me interestingly. We asked them about professional development, which is an area that is extremely hard to track from the demand side. Schools do not keep good records about the money they spend for professional development because it comes from so many different places. But we did ask them, we tried to stay away from those dollar questions for just the reasons that John mentioned. We did ask them about what they were doing. And the overwhelming majority of them identified the professional learning community as their primary methodology for currently delivering professional development to their teachers. Now, a professional learning community is typically a group of grade level teachers, or it may be subject area teachers. In some small buildings, it may be the K-3 versus the 4, 5, 6 teachers who meet together to talk about specific problems in their classroom and to devise solutions to those problems, to analyze data, to create lesson plans. A good professional learning community will allow teachers to observe one another, critique one another's lessons. So that can be very powerful professional development. It can also be very weak depending on the leadership and the content. Professional learning community is as good as what the various members bring to the table. And the other piece of this that makes me laugh is I have a feeling many superintendents like professional learning communities because there's no cost associated with them. That doesn't say that you guys can't take advantage of the fact that that's what they're doing, but those are the areas that we found looking at. I want to make a couple more comments because as I listened to John, I didn't know exactly what John was going to say, so I couldn't pull everything. Certainly assessment is another big area in the schools. You know that. It's going to continue to be big. So, as John can bring in assessment results into the research that he's doing, it will be very beneficial. And then a final comment about this science versus social studies issue, which I'm also fascinated by, John. We asked a question that was I would have had to recalculate it, and I just didn't have time. But essentially we sort of asked them about the extent how much they were using digital resources in math, language arts, science, and social studies. And I don't know that what we got was very useful, but it struck me that what happened was at the elementary school level, there was a much higher reliance on digital resources for science, and that may be part of what you're seeing in your results, John. That combination of elementary school that digital works well for science, and also that elementary teachers are not terribly comfortable with science, and so this is a way to give the kids a good experience while also helping the teacher along. So that may be a part of why you found such strong science tendencies, because I think someplace you commented, maybe in the report, that there was a K-5 slant to some of this stuff, and that might be part of that. And with that, I will turn it back to you guys. Happy to answer any questions John might have to me about what we found, or and if you're interested in this particular report, which is only available within EdNET Insight, you've got contact information for a way to get more details. Back to you, Karen.
Okay.
Actually, before we go there, there were a couple of things that I just thought I'd answer a couple of the questions. The grade level question is something I didn't talk about in this.
Right.
We did look at it and asked people to give us that data. And what was interesting to me in part from the vendor perspective is that something on the, we asked them to identify pre-K, K-5, 6-8, and 9-12, and for roughly, I think 55%, they just said all of it. And initially we were thinking, gee, are they finding that what they're producing goes across the grades, or is it that they can't tell who's buying? And I frankly think it's the latter. They just don't know who's buying what. On the other hand, when we looked at the other roughly 45% or 50% that was allocated to grades, it looked heavily elementary at first. And then we did a little simple math, which was we divided elementary by 6, meaning K through 5. We divided middle school by 3 and high school by 4, and lo and behold, it roughly came to about, I don't know, 22 to 25 million per grade. And that to me was a very interesting, consistent piece across the spectrum. So you get, 6 grades times that it makes elementary look larger, but it's really somewhat of a grade dependent, number of grades dependent finding. On the other hand, in science, there was a very distinct leaning towards K-5, and that. And now again, this was before the science adoption in Texas, which made a big difference, and some of the larger science adoptions in other states. So it may be that we're going to see some differences as a result of those state policies.
Well, I've always been struck when people ask questions about, the size of the social studies or the science market by how strongly that is impacted by where we are in the adoption cycle. Because you can have a huge market one year and then it falls off to nothing for 2 or 3 years. And it will be interesting going forward, John, to see how all of that is impacted by Common Core, but that's a different discussion.
By far. The other thing, Nelson, I do think that the content platform business is really interesting. Having and I distinguish between, say, a learning management system like a Plato that comes in with their content, versus a learning management system platform like a Blackboard or Moodle that is somewhat content-free. Now, from my perspective, there's a whole new area of delivery for these kinds of platforms that can live in a classroom with a teacher and where there is embedded assessment. And that is a huge area of research now of, the trick of the Platos and the LMSs in the past has been, if you know all of your curriculum and and you're doing assessment and mapping it back into the curriculum, then the formative evaluation can be fairly tightly controlled. If you open up the content, you lose the ability to have a simple formative evaluation process, and you have to become much more sophisticated in the statistics that you're using. So while I think there's a call for the more platform-oriented open architecture that can support a variety of products, I think the more people want to do that and have embedded assessment, the more they're hoping for 2 very distinct pieces.
Agreed, John. And I think that moving forward, some of your categories are going to be harder for people to respond to. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure. On the school side, people aren't sure what an LMS is. I would think if you're publishing one, you do, but there are some blendings going forward that I think will also create challenges for gathering some of this information from the suppliers.
Yes. Karen, do you want to, we're nearing the end. I want to make sure we get to the next steps. Do you want to talk about this, or should I?
Sure. I'll take a few of these, and then if we don't get to some of your questions, because there are quite a few more, we'll clearly try and get them into an email to you, because they are important. I just wanted to remind you that we are starting the data collection for this last school year, so we can get that out much sooner than we did this time. And we're also moving into higher ed, and we have that survey about ready. And again, if you haven't participated in the past, there's some notes there about why you should. We think that you're going to get good data. It's aggregated in a way that is completely anonymous and very, very confidential. We guarantee that nobody can figure out what your revenues really are. And it should be relatively short. It took longer for some of the larger publishers, et cetera, to give us information, because they had to go to, sometimes across a lot of different divisions to pull information together. But it worked, and they were able to get that. What you will get is a detailed report of the findings then for free of charge, and a lot of the information that's aggregated in the final report, and then hopefully information that will actually help you plan your business and think about the future with real data. We do have some data points that we can start collecting, and hopefully all of this is going to be live tomorrow. It's in flux right now because we were so focusing on getting this report done. There will probably be a press release in the morning about the availability of the report and the ability to go to our e-store to actually get that information. So in the remaining minute or two, John, is there a question? One of the questions, maybe Frank's, which is aside from this reading and science, were there any other surprises or what we found out that really differed from our expectations?
I think there are a couple. I went over it quickly, but the notion that we actually had a reasonable stab at a number for the size of the whole market at $7.5 billion, and the fact that this was supported by several other triangulation attempts was, to me, a really important finding. And I think the grade level piece that we really saw consistency across numbers of grades was also fairly interesting. And that kind of result, I think, is something we really need to take a look at over time. And that was, I'd love for this to have been the fourth year where we can really begin to have more confidence in the things that we are finding, or whether what we're seeing is some artifact of the particular group of responders. So at this point, I do think the one really outsized piece was the science, social studies piece, and the lower responding for infrastructure, I think, is indeed an artifact of who we got to respond, and we tried to take that into account in beyond the extrapolation to the adjusted numbers.
And then speaking of science, I know there was a question about the kind of science digital information that's going out, whether it's online, purely online, blended, et cetera. Do either of you know a source for how the distinction is between sort of some of these full courses or blended in areas like science or other specific content areas?
We did not go after that. I want to, and part of what we discussed with the data committee from the beginning was this began with a very complicated spreadsheet that nobody wanted to fill out. And so we modified it in order to get participation, and the plan is to then conduct on calls to answer those kinds of questions when we and do a sort of smaller survey. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's the next step of where we need to be.
Yeah, one of the reasons that this one took so long is that the data committee, when we started building the questionnaire, just kept adding things and breaking it into more and more pieces, and it became too long and complicated, and we ended up with too many people who just didn't want to respond to it as a result. So as John said, we greatly condensed it, and what you don't get is some of the detail, but at least we got some data. So I think at this point I've got all of the questions recorded. What I'd like to do is to just remind you that there will be a quick post-webcast survey. I think it's like 3 questions. And primarily to thank you all for joining us today. We had some great questions. I think we are starting to get some great data here at SIIA, and each report, it'll be hopefully more distinctive, more informative, and we'll also get you the information about the availability of this particular report. We will be posting a few of these slides on the website for you to download. Look for another email that will come from your registration that you did earlier, and we'll get that information out soon. So thank you for joining.